At this time, it's my honor to welcome to the stage NTSA President, Vice Admiral Sean Buck, U.S. Navy retired.
One of the highlights on the second day of ITSEC each year is to have as senior of representatives as we can of our military services, whether they're operators, whether they're acquisition professionals, and we always try to have an international flavor to that also. Today we've had the good fortune of assembling that type of panel, and I have the privilege of moderating it. My intent today, and let me preface it first, I believe around you all on the sides of where you're sitting, there are individuals from the staff who have little white cards. I would ask you if what they say up here on the panel instigates a question in your mind that you would like them to answer, please write it on a white card, pass it down your aisle. They're going to give them to me. And I would like to try to include some of your questions into the questions that I'm going to ask the panel that I've pre-staged in my own mind that are applicable to the audience. So start thinking now. We have a total of 90 minutes, and I hope to get to as many questions as possible. My intent will be I'm going to give you some context of who these fine individuals are, and I'm going to read some of their biographies, and like I did on the last fireside chat, give you an appreciation of what is in their job jar, what's in their portfolio, and what might be driving what they're saying and what they're asking of you, industry, to help them accomplish their mission. I'm going to turn it back to them for their opening remarks, and then after we're done with opening remarks, I'll go up and down the panel with questions for each of them. So without further ado, representing the United States Navy immediately to my right is Vice Admiral Robert Goucher. He's currently serving as the Commander of Naval Submarine Forces, Commander Submarine Force U.S. Atlantic Fleet, and Commander Allied Submarine Command. Admiral Goucher's operational assignments include service in both fast attack and ballistic missile submarines, and operationally having commanded at the 05 with the USS City of Corpus Christi, SSN 705, at the major command level as Commodore of Submarine Development Squadron 5. While serving in Major Command of Development Squadron 5, he was responsible for the Seawolf class submarines, Unmanned Undersea Vehicle Squadron 1, and several special project ocean engineering, research, and development detachments. As Commander of Submarine Forces now, he is the undersea domain lead for our Navy and is responsible for the Submarine Force's strategic vision. As Commander of Submarine Force Atlantic Fleet, he commands all Atlantic-based U.S. submarines. And as the Commander of Allied Submarine Command, he is the principal undersea warfare advisor to all NATO North Atlantic Treaty Organization strategic commanders. Welcome to ITSEC. Representing the United States Marine Corps, my fourth down from my right, is Brigadier General Matthew Tracy. He's currently the Commanding General of the Education Command, and he's the President of Marine Corps University located in Quantico, Virginia. He assumed these roles in June of 2024. He is commanded at the platoon level, the company level, the battalion level, and the regimental level, as well as commanding in the recruiting station world. Ashore, he has extensive ops in policy, ops, and planning expertise. General Tracy, welcome to the panel. Representing the Air Force is Major General Luke Cropsey, second to my right here. He's currently serving as the Program Executive Officer for Command, Control, Communications, and Battle Management, working for the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics. In this role, he integrates the C3BM material enterprise within the department, aligning technical architecture and acquisition authorities to streamline the delivery of decision advantage capabilities within the Department of the Air Force Battle Network. Now, I thought it was nice and needed to define what is the Department of Air Force Battle Network. That is the integrated system of systems connecting sensor, effector, and logistics systems, providing better situational awareness, faster operational decisions, and decisive direction to the entire force. He, too, has led at the squadron, group, and wing levels as a materiel leader and a senior materiel leader. General Cropsey, welcome to the panel. Major General James Smith, if you're in the audience earlier this morning, you've already heard me introduce him, but I would like to repeat his biography for those who are new. Major General Smith is currently serving as the commander, Space Training and Readiness Command, headquartered at Patrick Space Force Base in Florida. As the commander, he is responsible for preparing the U.S. Space Force and more than 14,000 military and civilian guardians to prevail in competition and conflict through innovation, education, doctrine, and test activities. His career spans numerous space operations and acquisition positions, including command at the squadron, group, wing, garrison, and field command levels. Prior to his current position, Major General Smith served as the Vice Director for the Joint Force Development, the J-7, on the U.S. Joint Staff in the Pentagon. General Smith, welcome back to the stage. Representing the United States Army is my friend and colleague in crime with modeling and simulation here in Orlando, Brigadier General Christine Beeler. She currently has the title of the Capability Program Executive for Simulation Training and Instrumentation. In that role, she executes a multi-billion-dollar testing, training, and threat portfolio each year. The organization also manages portfolios of fielded systems with a current inventory value of over $2.65 billion in 125 locations, serving with over 335,000 training devices in 65 countries abroad and over 480 sites worldwide. Before assuming the charter as CPE, Brigadier General Beeler served as the commanding general of the U.S. Army Contracting Command, headquartered at Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama. She began her Army acquisition career in 2001 and is a certified in defense contracting, program management, and logistics. General Beeler, welcome to the panel. And last but not least, our international rep. This is Brigadier General Damien Hill of the Australian Army and the Australian Defence Force. He is currently serving in Australia as the Director of the General Joint Collective Training Branch, the J-7 Joint Operations Command in Australia. He is a career Army officer, first enlisting in his Army and then earning his commission. He worked in the regimental operations and has, according to his biography, served in every position possible in your regimental force. He also has quite an extensive deployable operational career, deploying around the world in many operations with many of Australia's joint partners, to include the United States, and has a tremendous amount of on-scene, boots-on-the-ground combat experience. General Hill, we appreciate having your international perspective, and we appreciate having your operational perspective with regards to talking to an entire industry that are creating training opportunities to make all of us better in our warfighting role. Welcome to the panel. Welcome to the United States, sir. So, without further ado, I'd like to give it over to Vice Admiral Robert Goucher for your opening remarks, sir.
Great. Hey, thanks, Sean. Well, first of all, it wouldn't be early December if I didn't start my remarks without saying beat Army. But since I'm a UCF grad, got my master's, I'll also say go Knights. So it's great to be here in Orlando, and I appreciate the chance to be here. So I'm going to start, first of all, I'm an operator, not an acquisition professional. So my perspective is going to be how to help the operating forces and improve our warfighting capability in the Navy and the submarine force. And I'll start with the problems I'm trying to solve. And that's really what got me here, because I was at Sea Air Space and I ran into the team from NOC TSD here in Orlando. And I started explaining to them how I think we can use game engines and virtual environments to solve a training problem. So the problem I have in the submarine force is I have too many submarines in maintenance. And what that translates to is I have entire generations of submarine officers who aren't getting the opportunity to go to sea on their own submarine. So they spend their entire tour as a division officer or a department head in the shipyard. Now we've had that issue ever since we've had submarines, but now it's magnified because so many are offline as we run over in the time it takes to build new submarines, because they still have crews even before they're commissioned, and in the time submarines are offline as we're fixing them. And so if I look ahead to the guy that has my job in 20 years, I worry he's going to look back and say, geez, Goucher, I really wish you did something about that. And so as I look at how to solve the problem, one way is what we do in our nuclear training center, where we have a complete facility that's all, or it's not virtual, but it's got like FPGA cards inside of machines that simulate how the nuclear reactor will work. But that costs north of $500 million. My guess is today it would cost $1 billion, and I get exactly one of them in Charleston, South Carolina. What I need one at every place that I'm doing major maintenance, and I need the cost to be way less than $1 billion. So I think that virtual reality is the opportunity. And we already have the ability to go tour a single space, and I can have an operator touch a valve and see what happens, to kind of learn a single watch station. And that's very helpful, and we're getting a lot out of that. But I think it only scratches the surface, because the vision I have is that as I look at kids that are playing Halo, I can have a kid on the East Coast playing with a kid on the West Coast, playing with a kid in Australia, and they're all in the same environment. And so that if one kid does one thing, someone else can look through virtual reality and see their avatar executing that action. I'd like to be able to do that with every submarine. So while that submarine's in maintenance, it can just take the crew, it can go to a building, they can all put their headsets on, and they can literally operate the submarine, so that if someone in our machinery room touches a valve that's going to make temperature go up and set off an alarm in the control room, the person who's in the control room will actually see that alarm and have to respond to it. And they'll communicate with each other just like they do on the submarine, so that I'm not just doing individual training, but I'm doing team training. Now, that's never going to replace going to sea, but it can certainly raise the level of our proficiency and our understanding of the system, so that when we do get that precious time at sea, we're that much further along and we lift ourselves up. So I see that as a problem that this group can help me solve as I look to be able to network and advance our ability to conduct team training. Because I just don't see our submarines getting out of maintenance much faster anytime in the next decade. I mean, we're working on it. That is a top priority, but it just takes time to go fix the industrial base and our years of only building one submarine at a time. We've got to lift up all of that in order to kind of get on plan, so I get enough submarines to be able to go to sea. So I think that using virtual reality, game engines, and interactive team training is a way that I can really solve that problem. So that's really what brought me here today. But I'm going to share with you quickly two more problems that I want to solve. One is data. And so that is being able to get data into a common data environment so that it's government owned, and anyone from industry then can bring their intellectual property on top of the Navy data and help us solve problems. And if you look at unmanned and hybrid systems, if you're not thinking data, and if you're not thinking autonomy, and you're not thinking AI, you're not thinking about the problem right. Because we will get smarter with the sensors, we'll get smarter with the propulsion and HM&E systems, but it's our ability to teach that robot to think better that is going to be foundational. And so it's building out the data strategy to make sure that we've got everything in a common environment that we can build on top of. And I see opportunities in predictive maintenance and in making my autonomous systems that much smarter. And then that data environment goes right to my third problems that I need to solve, which is world-class modeling and simulation. So, when I grew up, we drew our plans on a piece of paper and we hand calculated it. And even today, when we use computer simulation, I'm going to go to DC on Thursday, and I'm going to meet with some folks that are looking at a study that was commissioned by the Joint Staff. It does modeling and simulation, but it's based on the laws of physics. So it is all based on assumptions. So the modeling in sim run is based on one moment in time, on one day, in an assumed environment against nominal, typically most dangerous conditions, and then it comes up with an outcome. What I need to bound it with the laws of physics. So the equation still applies, but every variable can't just be a constant and an assumption. That's where I need Gen AI to look at all the variables and be able to run thousands of iterations to tell me what is truly most likely. An example of that is if I do straight physics-based submarine operations, someone's going to make an assumption about how sound propagates in water. That is based on physics, but what it does not take into account is every variation in the water column. It doesn't take into account changing background noise, and it doesn't take into account the impacts of how that sensor might perform, based on what its likely age is, because what we all know is as much as something is supposed to work, there are losses built in there that are not predicted by that straight physics-based model. And I think Gen AI, fed by a strong data background, has the opportunity to give me that variability that truly gives me a most likely scenario that I can quickly toggle to, well, what if that happened in December instead of June? How does everything change, and be able to do that in an instant? That's how we need to be making decisions in the future. And that applies not only to operations, it applies to maintenance. So think digital twin of every individual submarine. The way we do it now is we do it by class, right? So that it makes one set of assumptions. In order to get out of maintenance, back to my original problem, I need a digital twin of every single submarine. That's how we're building our new submarines. But now I have to be able to populate that with world-class sensing and a world-class understanding of not only what is nominal, but what I'm seeing in real life against every hull, and then I can archive that and understand how that performs through its life cycle, so I know if I'm corroding at a faster rate or I'm not corroding anywhere near as much as I predicted, so then I can make better operational decisions in the future. So those are a couple of the problems we're trying to solve in the submarine force, and happy to talk about any more of those in more detail. Thanks very much.
Admiral, thank you. It may go without saying, but exactly what you've articulated as your need for when a submarine is in the shipyard, under maintenance, or being built to get that crew proficient and keep them up to speed applies exactly to the Navy's surface force also, who suffers from the same problem. So thank you very much for articulating your specific needs. General Cropsey?
Yeah, so I think what I'm going to do is pick up on a theme actually Bob introduced in the talk from the last session, and that's the issue of complexity. I think we are actually past a tipping point on this topic, where the systems that we're putting out today are at the point where they're not linear anymore. And when I say they're not linear, I mean you can't give a system a discrete input and know deterministically what it's going to do on the other end, just because of the size, the scale, and the complexity of these systems. And in the C2 environment, which is where I'm coming from, you have the added benefit of putting a meat calculator in the middle of it called the human brain. And if you start looking at the cognitive space that's associated with what we have to do in the C2 arena, there's obviously a massive amount of data that you're trying to push to the right brain at the right time in the right context so that they can make a better decision faster than your adversary. How we actually simulate and model that is a different question altogether. And there's some interesting work that the Advanced Battle Management System cross-functional team has been doing over the last couple of years around trying to actually define and discretize that cognitive set of functions that happen inside of an air battle manager's brain when they're trying to fight a war. And they've sliced it into 50-plus odd discrete things that have to happen over the course of a battle and a battle manager's actual decision cycle. Okay, the question is, how do we take one of those kinds of events, which quite frankly, we may not actually see until we hit combat itself because of the scale and the complexity of the event. Like actually getting an exercise at that size and at that scale, as big as we can get them, probably still isn't going to capture the full dynamics. So how do you create a training environment and a simulation environment that's putting the cognitive load that you're going to expect for the capability and the capacity that's going to be required for the battle manager in this construct to actually understand the full weight and scope of the things that we're going to have to ask them to try to fight their way through. And I don't have any, by the way, I don't have answers for these things, right? There's a lot more of you than me, so I'm going to ask you the questions, and maybe I'll get lucky, because I can assure you, you won't in the other direction. But when you look at it from that perspective, really where you start to come down to brass tacks is understanding how the way we simulate these environments and the way that we create the entities inside of them, back to that massive parallel gaming environment that we were talking about earlier. How do we start leveraging some of these commercial innovations into this space? And then how do we do it in a way that doesn't bury it underneath of, I'll call it bureaucratic oversight and weight in a compliance context? Because I can assure you, left to our own devices, we will bury it. So we're in the context of the acquisition transformation conversation from this morning, I think we have to find a way to actually not only just address the complexity aspects of this in the technical space, which is real. There's another aspect to this that I think in the end may actually dominate the technical piece, and that's the culture piece. If we don't solve the culture piece as a function of both the way that we fight and the way that we acquire, the technical piece is just table stakes. My deputy has a quote on his desk. It says, if you think you have a technology problem, you either, one, don't understand technology, or two, you don't understand your problem, okay? There is a lot of constructs that are packed into just the way that we tend to operate day in and day out, right? And I think there's two facets to this. The first one is that bureaucracies, and this gets to the fat tail conversation from earlier, right? Bureaucracies don't like events that are in the tails of the distribution. They are constantly looking to push everything to a mean. Translated for the non-technical people, bureaucracies generate mediocrity. That's what they do. I mean, that's what they're designed to do. They're designed to create repetitive, over time, consistent results. And if you're in this environment, that means you're going to lose. The heavier your bureaucratic weight is on top of what you're trying to get after, the more you're going to deviate back to the mean, which deviate and mean don't go together, but work with me here, okay? The other aspect to this is the idea that, and again, Bob brought this up, speed kills here. But it isn't random speed. It's got to have direction to it, and there's got to be an operational outcome that we're exceptionally clear about trying to achieve. And if we aren't using operational metrics to gauge how well we're doing inside of our modeling or simulation, we're asking ourselves the wrong questions. We're putting the wrong metrics into place. I tell my program managers all the time that while I care deeply about their cost, schedule, and performance, nobody else does. Okay? And maybe overstated, but look, at the end of the day, if we aren't actually judging the results that we're producing based on the operational impact that it's having, we're crazy. Like, that just doesn't make any sense. We're using the wrong metrics to gauge what we're doing. So part of what I would petition this room around here is, as you're looking at the modeling and the simulation capabilities and the training that you're putting into play, think really hard about what those metrics look like as a function of how well that training, that simulation, or that modeling is working, okay? One of the first adages as an engineer that you ever learn is that all models are wrong. Some are useful. How do you make what you're doing as useful as you possibly can to the operational environment that you're pointed at? And as a purveyor of those systems that we're trying to push out to the field so that we can get inside of the adversary's OODA loop, the ability for our command and control systems, in particular in my case, to operate faster with better data and better decisions is the difference between winning and losing. And so I will leave you with that. Happy to take any returning fire that you might have on any of those during the Q&A, but I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. General Smith?
Yeah, thanks, Vice Admiral Buck, and good morning again, everyone. I know you got to hear a lot from me and about the Space Force earlier, so I will just make a few opening comments and then cede my time to the other gentlemen and ladies at the table. I guess as we talk about challenges as it relates to this environment, and we'll move from the strategic that was a little bit at the fireside chat down to some of the more tactical challenges we face. First, fully endorse a lot of what we heard from Vice Admiral Goucher. I think there's a lot of parallels between the space domain and the undersea domain, and some of the challenges that he's facing are similar challenges that we face. 3 other challenges that I would just highlight. One is speed. We've heard a lot about speed. We heard it from Mr. Ritchie a few minutes ago in his speech. We have to have training processes and training systems that can match the adaptability and speed with which the real world is moving. In my role on the Joint Staff previously, we worked some with the Ukrainians. I don't know what the current state of affairs is, but at the time, it was on the order of weeks where new TTPs, new systems were rolled out onto the battlefield. If we don't have training and test capabilities that can match that speed, we'll be struggling. Second challenge I would highlight,
Thank you.
and that we continue to work with is integration of space capabilities into joint models and joint domain. The example I'll give here, the chairman runs a war game every year. The couple of years that I was able to participate, space was run upstairs in a small classified room, and we wouldn't even talk about the outcome of the classified activities down on the common operations floor. And that was driven in large part because we often talk about classification as a restriction to our space capabilities. There is some work that needs to be done there and that we're getting after, but there's also a perception of classification that is often misunderstood. So we would take some super secret activities up in the classified room, which we should be able to convey to the exercise combatant commander and capture in our modeling and simulation. These activities occurred, and therefore your position, navigation, and timing is degraded at 50%. Your comm is degraded at 50%. There should be nothing classified about that level of communication of the effects from the space domain, and we need to make sure that's integrated into all our models, and that our space models are integrated into joint models. And then the third, probably more for our government crowd in the room, but we have to, what I would call program stability, requirement stability, training stability. We can't sacrifice training systems as the first thing to go when we run into budget troubles on a program. We often run into this in the space domain, and we end up delivering great ground systems, great satellite hardware, but we don't have the systems on which our operators can train and become combat ready. So 3 challenges that, in addition to some of the others that were highlighted, that I'm facing, and look forward to talking more about those and anything else you'd like to as we go forward. Thank you.
Thanks, General Smith. General Tracy?
Thanks a lot. Well, just want to start out by saying what a thrill it is to be up here with this august group and to be amongst you all here. I do want to start by just saying thank you to the volunteers that you see, many in the back, direct you around. They've been setting up for quite some time. Many of them do it year after year, and I learned at breakfast today that many of them miss Thanksgiving and don't have time for it. So if you want to just give a round of applause to our volunteers who put this together. These flowers don't get here by themselves. So I have a 16-year-old son. I don't know if any of you do, and if you do, you're probably a better parent than I. Mine disappears into his room for days at a time. We don't see him. But a couple weeks ago, he came down and he said, "Hey, Mom and Dad, would you guys like to play cards?" We were like, "Oh wow, what an opportunity to spend time with our son that we never see. What a thrill." And yeah, what do you want to play? Well, I want to play poker. So, okay, well, 5-card, Texas Hold'em, you know. And he wiped us out. He took all of our money, then he mocked us. He was calling me derogatory things like a fish. I don't even know what that was. And we discovered that he'd been in his room and he was learning strategies. He's on YouTube. Then he began playing synthetic games, and he's playing live games, and then studying his mom and dad and their mannerisms. And then when he felt like he was ready, he came down, right? And he knit, right, strategies with performance, with his understanding of the enemy. He had an objective, right? Yeah. So I thought to myself, as CG of Education Command and responsible for our AI adoption strategy, about our wargaming strategy and wargaming with AI and AI development of an AI planner. And then looking across the way at Training Command with their live virtual construction. Like this is where we're going. What if he was up there learning to be a JTF commander and learning the strategies, right? But to some of these problems you've articulated, imagine if the face cards were top secret. He couldn't look at them or know their value, right? Or the variables were so misunderstood in the undersea acoustics, right? That the numbers shifted or the suits shifted as you tried to play them, right? So this, but it maps, right? And there is an avenue. And there is already a cottage industry which you can go and learn these and develop extremely great skills at critical decision-making, strategy making, and understanding how to fight a joint task force from cislunar to subsurface. And that's what we're working on at Education Command, and then across the way at Training Command, actually doing it in a live virtual constructive environment with Project Tripoli. With that, I'll cede my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. General Beeler.
Admiral Buck, again, thank you for the opportunity. And I'm excited to represent the Army on this august panel of operators and acquisition professionals and partners from around the globe. You know, your story is a fun story, and I would like to give a little story on, I had the commanding general of the Combat Service Support Command, CASCOM, in my shop about 6 months ago. And she told us this great story about there's this competition on rope use. So I'm going to take it way down to the tactical level. Does anybody out there know what a rope use is? It's, the Marines love rope use because they don't bring enough water, so they have to make it. Oh wait, I think the Army helps them make it, but we won't go down that path. It's a positive Marine Corps story too. So there's only a few systems that are actually out there, these reverse osmosis units where you get to put it together and play with it and go out and create drinkable portable water so that you can survive. You know, I guess people need water. We can go without food for a while, but without water, it's a problem. So the Marines didn't have any. They didn't have any of the actual systems. But they had, I'm going to say, a video. They had a virtual model and a simulation of how to put it into operation, how to go about, you know, all the little parts and pieces that go together, how to test it to make sure the water that's coming out is good water. And there was this big competition up at Fort Lee in Virginia, and the Marines showed up having not actually put their hands on the actual pieces of equipment, and they kicked the Army's butt in putting that thing into operation, getting the result that needed to be gotten, having never touched the hardware before. And that's the power at the individual soldier crew level of being able to have that information, whether it's a YouTube video, whether it's an actual video of the device, whether it's the ability to put on VR goggles and walk through not just a system of that complexity, but we talked earlier about submarines. We've talked about shipbuilding. I've seen a whole variety of VR and XR capability in that space. The Army's object, and I would think every one of our object, is to be able to provide that training, the ability to train on all the little parts and pieces and strategically to any soldier, anywhere, anytime. That's the operational outcome we need, because we need to have people be able to do that whether they're sitting in dry dock or, in my case, they're sitting in the middle of, you know, Fort Bliss or in the National Training Center waiting to get into the box, waiting to go do something in the live environment, which We will never want to get away from the live environment as much as possible. Those parameters really test the metal. But if we can get to the live environment, having run the example multiple times over and over again, imagine how much more effective and efficient that training time is, whether it's in the water, whether it's actually on some space-based capability that, in many cases, there's a lot of things we can't do. I can't replicate the EW fight most of the time, or the cyber fight most of the time, because the FAA gets really upset when I turn on some of those things and they can't fly their airplanes. That becomes a problem. But we need to know how to fight that way. We need to know how to do those things. And the community here is who's solving that problem. One of the things the Army's trying to get out of is I'm trying to get out of the idea of building things. So whether it's commercial, or whether it's non-developmental item, or whether it's the actual weapon platform itself, it creates data. I want to be able to get that useful data, bring it into my ecosystem, curate it in a way. We have a lake house. I learned all about houses and lakes and data lakes, and I have a data lake house that's enabled me to pull the data out of my CTC information system out at either JRTC down at Fort Polk or NTC, pipe that data out of what was once a closed restricted network, bring it into the NIPRNet, and eventually will be in the CIPRNet. Soon will be in IL5 in the cloud, so that it can be seen and manipulated and reported on. And if the Chief of Staff of the Army wanted to see how a division was performing in the dirt, he could sit in his office and literally watch the engagement go on. Not so that he's the 5,000-mile screwdriver, right, providing that command, but so he can, we can see those things. And then I can take every division and layer every division's activity in the box going through those types of activities. And where are those gaps in our training capability that we need to fill? Like, why is everybody getting this wet gap crossing, perhaps, or this fire engagement incorrect? Why are they unsuccessful? Or why is everybody successful in this other space, right? All that data, that's the real weapon system that the modeling and simulation community can then bring to bear on the fight, so that we can practice and we can see how we're doing things. And we're going through the process of going after this stuff very commercially. If possible, we just hired a great contractor, Battle Road, and they're bringing Atom Engine to our next-gen constructive environment. But that's one piece of the ecosystem. As we build this ecosystem, I'm going to be looking at whatever's available, whether it's from Meta or from a Gemini tool, whatever's out there. I want to be able to pull it in, see how it operates inside the ecosystem. If it's useful, use it, and move on and keep moving on to the next thing. And so that's what I would offer is from this. There's an opportunity for everybody in that space, because we're not wed to one thing. We want to see what's available, and if it's great now, great. And if it becomes less great in the future and something else is great and it gets us that next level, that's what we want to be able to go after. And I think the acquisition reform that we talked about earlier today, the way the Department of the Army is going about acquisition reform, and really the Army Transformation Initiative, and how we're restructuring our organizations so that the Training and Transformation Command owns the requirement from individual soldier all the way to concept development, to then getting those things out into the field so that the corps and theater commanders can actually go and execute that fight. I think that's going to enable us to be much more effective operationally. And then the acquisition corps, as we look to make sure we're aligned with the warfighting functions, that's going to give us the capability to move faster, to meet those operational needs quicker, and to take advantage of all of the legislation and regulatory changes that are coming up. I yield.
Thank you. General Hill?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Firstly, if you please don't turn on Google Translator. I promise you I am speaking English, albeit in a slightly slangy accent, and I'll do my best to speak slowly because we have a very bad habit. And Google has not been able to crack the Australian accent. This is my third ITSEC, and for me, as a training and simulation officer, this is the Disneyland of training and simulation. I get excited every time I'm here. And unfortunately, I'm not an acquisition officer, but I've spent tens of millions of dollars based upon my visits here. The bad news is I'm about to finish my 4-year tenure. The good news is I brought my replacement with me. So all of the industry that come here, it's really important for those of us who don't have those big primes located in our home countries to come here, discuss primes, engage with our allies and partners to ensure that what we do acquire is interoperable. And that's a really important part of my current role. I thought I'd just give you a quick snapshot of my background, and it'll give you a context of why I'm here. Apart from my experience as a battery commander, battalion commander, brigade, and joint task force commander, which gave me a really good seminal experience in training. My real seminal experience was as an exchange officer with the United States Marine Corps Warfighting Laboratory as their plans branch head, where I was taught about historically based, future thinking, concept-based life force experimentation, and the ability to take an operational or tactical concept, attach technology to it, make sure the doctrine is challenged, give it to Marines, and put it through an exercise and break it to failure so that the next time you're actually moving forward was a real great experience for me. And I had the great opportunity in RIMPAC 2010 to work with 3rd Fleet and 3rd Marines to really test ideas as the Marine Corps was starting to come out of Afghanistan and focus back on their saltwater responsibilities. Incredibly powerful experience for me. I also commanded our combat training centre. The time I was there, we were putting our forces through operational rehearsals for Afghanistan and Iraq. And so training and getting people to be at a point where we started the rehearsal, that they were at that right point that I could train them to the level to certify them for operations, again, taught me that they need that training continuum is really important. The tools we put in their hands are important so that I can advance their training so they are ready. I've lost soldiers in combat that I can absolutely know it was because I didn't train them prior to them deploying in the manner they needed to be for operational service. So I take training very, very seriously because it's about that more, as David Hackworth used to say, more sweat on the training field, less blood on the battlefield. So that's seminal experience for me as well. And lastly, the J7 role, I am our only operational J7. We only have one COCOM, and it is a global COCOM. So I'm responsible for exercising the joint force for warfighting. That's all I do. I am all of our major exercises, whether they're field training, command post exercises, that's what I'm about. I'm about testing the joint force to breaking point every single time. Sometimes it's easier than I would like it to be, but it's about testing that. And I'm responsible for exercises such as Talisman Sabre, which we ran this year, and breaking and testing the limits of capability is really important. And just because General Tracy had a story, I'll talk about my son. League of Legends is a game. It came out, I think, South Korea. It's a team game, combat game. I'd sit there with my son. He was quite good at it. He was ranked, I think, 100th in the world, which I think's good. I don't know. I did not understand anything of that game. But what I did hear, I heard them quoting Sun Tzu, and I heard them discussing combat tips with each other over their radio. So what tells me is that there are technologies out there that our kids are using that we need to embrace because it's teaching them how potentially to fight in the future, how to communicate in the future. And so those of us who are Luddites stuck in the 1980s, we need to embrace the way that they think because they're going to be the next generation of people sitting at the table here training our force. Thank you.
Thank you, General Hill. Well, I think we heard General Cropsey say that he might be drawing fire. General Cropsey, you drew fire. I have a whole bunch of audience-generated questions, and they've got your name all over them.
Bring it.
As we stated earlier, and you've read in all of our advertising, the lead services of ITSEC 2025 this year are both the Air Force and the Space Force. So I want to give the first question to the team of Air Force and Space Force, because this was written for both of you. So General Cropsey and General Smith, the joint synthetic environment was mentioned by Mr. Rod Stevens and Colonel Klopstein earlier this morning. Will Air Force Command and Control and space systems that support C2 be integrated into the JSE? Can you elaborate, please?
I told Rob no a couple months ago. And it wasn't a right now no. It was, I think we need to work our way into this, and here's why. In order for the C2 piece to this to make a whole lot of sense in JSE, I actually need the models in there for the things that I need to see too. And so until that's populated to the point where I have a representative cross-sampling of platforms that I'm telling where to go, when to go, what to do, how to do it, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me to put a lot of effort into getting a C2 model in there, okay? There's an underlying problem that is, I'll call it parasitic to the C2 problem, and it's the comms thing. So my life would be way easier if I was called C2 instead of C3. Because the connecting comms actually creates a massive headache for me when it comes to how we get data where it needs to go. And in order for the C2 to work, I actually have to have the comms that go with it. In order for me to get to the comms, I actually need a network model that does more than white card the fact that the comms does or doesn't exist, right? And as our adversaries get more sophisticated around how they attack the comms, we have to actually create a more resilient architecture around how we do that. And this is where I will defer to Jim here on the space side, but the ability to go through multiple different pathways in order to get that connectivity where you need it so you can do the C2 on that backbone is paramount to where we need to go. And I think as JSE comes along and we start building more and more of those platforms into that environment, getting the C2 and in particular the comms models embedded into that space will be a key prerequisite for us to actually implement a C2 capability into JSE that will actually provide positive training value. Right now, I'm concerned that in a lot of the venues where we end up, I might actually be doing negative training because of the amount of white carding that gets done in a lot of these cases. So we're still working through what the evolution looks like into a JSE kind of an environment, but right now I'm not in there, and I think until we can get additional platforms and additional comms models built into that environment, it'd probably be premature for me to dive into it right now. But Jim, any thoughts on your side with any of that?
Yeah, this is maybe Luke. Luke gave you a good acquisition answer. I'll give you the operational answer, which is we need, is the problem I said I was referring to earlier. We need space capabilities integrated with joint capabilities in a modern sim environment. Whether that's JSE, whether that's something else, that is TBD. I didn't get a chance to talk a lot about our OTTI brothers and sisters in the former panel, but I'll highlight them a little bit here and kind of the distinct roles that we have. As STARCOM, we're the requirements owner. We get to bring together requirements from across the Space Force as to what we need in a test and training environment. Then I give those to Corey Klopstein, and he applies his acquisition expertise to figure out what the best solution is. So we have given him requirements along those lines. The other thing I'll mention in the space realm, and you may have heard General Saltzman mention this in some public forums, the way he describes it, we're turning from a merchant marine into a Navy. So we had a service provider in the merchant marine, and now we need to be a warfighting service in the form of a Navy. And so while I've highlighted the need to integrate into the joint environment, we first have to have models, and Luke kind of highlighted this, models that accurately reflect what's going on in the space domain that we can then integrate. So the long-term vision, yes, fully integrated. The short-term steps that get us there along the way, look forward to hearing more about if you go to Corey Klopstein's panel later in the day. So, thanks.
Very good. Thank you, gentlemen. Admiral Goucher, this is a question that was directly in response to your initial remarks. Much of your problems were part of C&O Clark's revolution in training vision. Now, more than 25 years later, we are still not meeting the mark to best support the operator and the operations. Let me finish. As a joint combined allied force, what needs to be done in the requirements, acquisition, contracting community differently to achieve your objectives? I know you're an operator, so I might not go down that road on the acquisition, but if you can touch on the wave tops of that from an operator's perspective.
Yeah, so I don't want to get too down on Navy training and everything else, and we've made a lot of progress, and we're we are slowly moving, and like the example of starting up the reverse osmosis unit, so we have the same thing on submarines, and we are using digital training to do that, and in order to kind of lift up our operators so they're that much closer when they actually get to the machine. But to kind of your question of how do we get to the next step, how do we really scale and exponentially move the needle on that joint Navy and allied, that is a wicked hard problem. And some of it is we have a lot of sunk cost bias, right? We've kind of moved down the street on certain solutions, but I think you heard several of us say the same thing, and it's about how do we get to a common data environment, right, at the IL5, IL6, IL7 level, that now we can unleash anybody to come operate on it? And how do we get NATO's data into that at the right security and classification, such that the data owner is the Navy, right, and then industry can come on top of that to really unleash what industry does well, which is innovate rapidly. Us in the mil spec, Navy development, I mean, there are just, or military development, there are just certain things that we will do because of their, their niche, and they're very highly classified, and we're never going to scale them. But for things we need to scale, I think it's all about having that common data environment, and that that we figure that out across the joint force. And I think that what you're seeing now with CDAO trying to provide some governance to that, and then pulling together the services, we're moving in that direction. But I think that we're just in the last few years realizing the importance of the data to being able to unlock and really take advantage of industry. And I think the elephant in the room on this is, where does intellectual property fall into that? How do we adjudicate those things? And I think that that's an interesting conversation, and one that I think is something we're going to have to solve going forward, because I fully appreciate the fact that each company that builds their special sauce doesn't want to share their special sauce, because that's how you make money. And I think on the government side, we have to respect that, but at the same time, we have to figure out how we're going to have this common environment so that we open up all the industrial base to be able to solve our problems, and we're not beholden to any one company. So I think that's what we have to navigate. I think we maybe didn't do that as well 20 years ago, and that's the opportunity space ahead of us.
Well, I think the way you just responded to that really kind of peels a couple of layers of the onion back when we hear from the higher senior officers that are about to implement this acquisition transformation. The devil's in the details. And as we talk about collaborating, the services need to talk to industry. Industry needs to collaborate with the services. And then you bring in our allied partners. And we all need to talk to try to be interoperable and to share data, which you've just concluded your remarks with. That's the devil in the details to make all this work. So thank you for that response. This is a general question to any of the panelists, and it might generate a good discussion with different perspectives. How much simulation training is adequate, and why?
I'll begin. I'll jump in on that. Just to tweak the question a little bit, I think we attack it the wrong way, and we have some trying to say how good is good enough and where do we find that time. I think if we have a reward system that pushes us to use simulation, I think we will all find that we'll begin gravitating to more time, greater depth, and more return on that investment. I'll just use an example in the wargaming. purchase several licenses, have a war game. It's a great place, a super methodology for educating yourself on strategy and decision making. We find nobody plays it, right? The day is full. We have a litany of things that must go on, right? But until it's brought either into the boardroom or there's a mechanism for reward, then you'll see play, or you'll see engagement, you'll see intellectual investment, you'll see unit training begin to rise substantially. And there'll be the units and individuals will begin to make their own cost, risk, analysis, trade-off benefits decisions to push themselves into simulation. So I don't have an answer on how much is the right amount, but if we set up the reward system or recognition system correctly, the individual and the units will find that.
Yeah, to build on that, right? You can simulate something on a laptop computer and get, let's say you're a tanker, you're an infantryman, a mechanized infantry guy or gal, you have a few, and until you sit inside the Bradley fighting vehicle and attempt to be the gunner or the commander in that vehicle or the driver and do all of the things that you're supposed to do in a space of like sitting next to each other out there in the audience, and try to operate all the switches, you will get the concept on a laptop, but you won't get the feel inside that vehicle. And if you do it enough inside the vehicle in a simulated environment, it's still not going to give you what you're going to have when you're actually trying to load rounds, you're actually trying to do all the other subtasks associated with operating that vehicle, moving that vehicle, having it under power. So now you've got the smell of diesel fuel, you've got all the sights and sounds and smells associated with that operational environment. Until you can get out on the range and shoot on the range, which is about as close as we can get to, using that vehicle with live ammo in a force, almost force on force, when we do a live maneuver and fire exercise. Each one of those things, all the way up, is simulation. Because the only thing that's not simulation is when we've got to put a unit on the battlefield and actually go and execute that real life mission in pick a place. We've done it for 20 some odd years in Afghanistan and Iraq, right? So that's not simulation. But every one of those steps before, building the calluses of execution of what has to happen inside that machine to make the team that's operating that machine, or to make the fact, the crew is not operating by themselves, right? So they've got to be able to operate with all of the other crews around them. All of that requires, to be an effective force, all of that requires to simulate all of those things all the way up. So I would offer, it's not how much, it's like, that's the thing. Like, we have to simulate every aspect we can in some form or fashion. And we can start it on a laptop. We can move to goggles and be in a VR or augmented reality environment. I've seen where our industry partners are using that all the time to go through and build entire buildings or execute an entire industrial production line layout and run through a whole production line using VR or other augmented capabilities. We are doing those things. We need to be more effective at doing those things. And so each time we can ramp it up, I think is a good thing in terms of how much. It's going to come down to how many dollars do I have and how much time do I have to do it in. That'll be the balance, but the object is I got to create a fighting force that's effective, and the most effective way to do it is to build them from, one simulation on a laptop, perhaps, all the way up to I'm literally on the range firing, or I'm conducting a live fire maneuver operation in the training center. Over.
I agree with all that. I don't know that the answer to this question stays the same in each domain. So yes, there's a difference in a pilot or a tank operator can get some training from simulation that they can't, that they then need some field experience in order to build upon. I think what's unique in the space domain, if you've not experienced space operations, in most cases you're sitting in front of a couple different screens and you're typing commands and you're putting in plans and you're executing actions. And we used to joke when I was a lieutenant, we would put in those commands and the only feedback you got was something on the screen would change. Well, you can do that with a simulation. I can 100% mimic the operational environment with an appropriately built training simulator. So I think it varies across domain. I think in the space domain, what we really need and what I really need is simulations that are 100% replicas of the operational systems. Often our training systems don't look the same, and then you either have some negative training or you're not getting the full effect that you could. When if we're really just dealing with a digital environment, it should be relatively easy to replicate. So that's what our OTTI team and others are helping, and I think that will move us towards the direction we need of better trained and warfighter-ready operators. Thanks.
Yeah, I'd just like to kind of pile on to the comment about you're never going to replace everything with simulation. So, for example, as captain of a submarine, the first indication a turbine dumped off was when I heard the fans shift to a slower speed, right? And that's just, has nothing to do with indications of the turbine. It's just all of a sudden you hear something change in the noise environment, and then you get the report. Until you can replicate that with simulation, you're never going to replace that. But you can complement that, which I think is the same comment that Christine was saying earlier. But what you can do in simulations you can't do in real life in training is high-risk training environments. So for example, simulating a combat scenario against 5 or 10 surface ships in close range where I have to position the submarine at high speeds but not risk the crew's life, I can only do in a simulator because in a peacetime situation, I'm not going to put the crew at risk of that. Nor do I typically have 5 or 10 surface ships sitting around to come and help me train. But if that's the environment that I might have to go fight in, the only way that I can go replicate and test the crew in that environment is with modeling and simulation in a training environment. And so that's how we do it today. And we do our tactical readiness evaluations. We do part of it at sea, but it's typically only one other submarine versus one or two surface ships versus our submarine at sea. We also do a section in the trainer where we build a no-fooling combat environment where we have to push our tactics to the limit that might normally put our crew at risk at sea, but because it's a simulation environment, we can really test that and wring out tactics that we might not otherwise be able to test for real. And then once we're confident in the simulator, we might go try them in a controlled environment at sea.
If I can, so from my experience, so as a battalion commander in an artillery unit, I had a 3-to-1 ratio. So at the tactical level, you must have used the JTAC dome trainer for missions 3 times before I'm going to waste a round on you. That provided me certainty that I was getting value for money for those weapon systems that I was using. When I was at CTC, we had live instrumentation, similar to what PEO Stride delivered to Army and others. That was about force on force. It was about the consequence management at the tactical level of making a decision to bound or not to disaggregate or something like that. So that was that tangible outcome of making a decision whether it was good, bad or indifferent. At the operational level, it's almost all simulation. I use sim to stimulate the operational C2 systems so that what they see is what they will use in combat. I'm just stimulating them via all of the mechanisms I have available to me, and I use obviously the US JLDC Federation. That's really important because that is about providing decision quality information to the commander, because my boss is my primary training audience. Everything is going to him to decide whether he makes a decision or delegates it to someone else to test those authorities. So it very much depends on where you sit in the pecking order as well.
Good. Thank you for your collective response. General Cropsey, I turn back to you for an individual question. We have spoken about both industry production capacity and training requirements for new systems. How ready is the Department of the Air Force Battle Network to integrate the desired influx of what I'm reading, CCA, from the Air Force, as well as other joint unmanned systems? And if I read that wrong, CCA, maybe you know what the person asking the question means.
Yeah, so I think, well, we've got an interesting distinction inside of this, and it's one that we make with what I call in the skin C2. So how are you going to actually control the movements of a collaborative combat aircraft, a CCA? In much the same way that, right, Jim would look at, hey, how are you actually going to command a satellite to maneuver, okay? That tactical level C2, in the skin C2, is not something that I do. So the individual weapon system builders or the platform owners, right, those are very tightly coupled engineering problems, and you want those kind of problems to stay with the platform because they're very nuanced. On the operational C2 side of this, so now we get into a conversation of, hey, where do you want to send those CCAs, or what you want that satellite to go do, and the effect that you want it to create. Now I get involved in that conversation. And we are, once again, back largely into a comms network conversation. Like, do I have the connectivity, the bandwidth, the reliability, all of the abilities that you're looking for with resilience and flexibility and agility? I mean, the abilities pile up here. To be able to ensure that you have access into that platform, those sensors, those weapons, and then fundamentally with whoever's making the decisions about what things need to go to what targets. That conversation, when it comes to the overall, I'll call it the architecture writ large for how you're going to do that C2 with those enabling comms, is an incredibly complex conversation, and one that you typically end up having to break down into, I'll call them subnets. And in fact, when you start talking about joint and coalition, that's exactly how you have to start thinking about them, in large part because of, as Jim mentioned earlier, the security constraints around how we move data between service enclaves, and then within a service, even between security classification levels, is a major factor in the way that you actually design those systems to work. So if you're trying to model or simulate an end-to-end system, and you actually don't have those particular choke points modeled or simulated inside of your environment, you're going to miss a critical component to what actually happens in the real world when it comes to what you have to sneaker net between systems, between operators that are trying to operate at multiple classification levels, the time lags that are involved. All of those kinds of things are what we call sticky information. They don't show up in the tech manual. They show up on the floor when you actually try to do it, and somebody goes, oh, crap, I got to go burn a CD to go do that. That wasn't in the plan, right? That wasn't in my timeline. So to the extent that your simulation environment is capable of capturing that data flow and those timelines and how that information actually looks and feels at the local level, I'd say simulate it. To the extent where you have sticky information that doesn't translate well because you have to experience it. Like it's got to be visceral and in your gut. And my only example on the submarine front was I got stuffed in the submarine trainer out in San Diego as an 04, and I swear I almost died in that thing, right? It's like, hey, you got pipes that are breaking, you need to fix them. You're thinking, oh, okay. And then they put you in this thing, and the water's like 50 degrees, and it's coming out at you like 200 PSI, right? Intellectually, I got it. When it came to actually going head to heart to hand, I was drowned, right? Those are the kinds of things that I don't know that you can simulate effectively. Like, you actually have to put somebody in there, stress them, and then give them another go at it after they realize actually you aren't going to drown if you just do what I tell you to go do, right? Those are the issues, and I'm like completely on a tangent now. But I have the microphone, so I think all that to say in the end, there are lots of things that are happening in this environment where you've got a whole raft of things potentially coming at you in the unmanned arena. I think we have a massive amount of work to do to figure out, one, how we do the in-the-skin command and control piece, which really smart people are working on. We have a whole lot of work to do on the operational C2 side of it when it comes to like how do you actually do the command and control of that many assets underneath of the cognitive load that an operator is going to have trying to manage that. Where and how does the AI and the machine learning play into that? And then like I have no stinking clue how to do the training for that yet, because I don't even know what the operational TTP is for it. So, we're back into this OODA loop between what you need to do operationally, what you need to do in experimentation, what you need to catch up on from a training and simulation environment, and I want all that to happen inside of a 12-hour cycle. I'm making the number up. That's not crazy. Okay, I'm in a software-defined world, and the idea that you can immediately go in and massively change the configuration profile of the system overnight is that's where we're trying to get to. So, yeah.
Thank you. General Smith, I'm going to field this question to you first, but it's a panel question. It will apply to everybody. Where can the Department of War adopt the 85% solution right now and then iterate it to 100% later mindset? What are some current on this horizon examples? And I think that's a question to all of you all.
Yeah, I'll give probably the pithy answer of I think everywhere. I'll let others give it maybe more specifics, but this is really just a risk discussion in my mind. Listening to, what do you do when you're driving over from the coast to ITSEC? You put Secretary Hegseth's acquisition speech on a podcast and listen to it. So that's what I did last night as I was driving over here. But he talked in there about trading operational risk for acquisition risk, or accepting more acquisition risk to minimize operational risk. I think you can talk about trading training risk for operational risk. You can talk about trading test risk for operational risk. And that's, I think, really what we're talking about when we're talking this 85 versus 100 kind of trade-off. The other example that comes to mind as we think about this, and this helps get after the speed challenge that I was referencing earlier. More than a decade ago, I had an opportunity to command the Range Operations Squadron out of Cape Canaveral. And this was the time as the shuttle was winding down and some commercial companies were getting started and trying to launch faster. As a range operations commander, we had been trained for years to minimize all risk. Before, maybe that's a little too extreme, but to minimize risk to the maximum extent before we launch anything. That's because we were launching significant national security payloads on the top of rockets, and the goal was to get risk as close as you can to zero so that you were able to successfully get that payload to orbit. As the commercial companies came onto our range, they questioned a lot of those assumptions. And they were willing to take more risk, and that hurt our head a little bit to some extent. But if you look at now, the Eastern Range this year, I think last week, crossed 102 launches this year. At the time when I was there over a decade ago, if we did one a month, our target was 12 to 20 probably would have been a success. I would say that the major difference, yes, there's some technology advances, but I think it's more a risk trade-off that has occurred. And they're willing to take some additional acquisition risk in order to drive operational outcomes at a faster rate. So I think that's what we need to do. The CSO has given me the direction to do that in the test realm. I think you heard mentioned earlier today, and then I think the Secretary Hegseth said it in his speech as well, that an 85% solution in the hands of operators is probably better than the 100% solution. The one area that we probably need to, and on the using that Eastern Range analogy, one thing we never took increased risk on was human safety, safety of the citizens around the range. So this is why I don't think it's just a pure numbers game. It's a risk calculation, and we have to be careful of the areas that we take risk. But I think there's plenty of areas in test, training, acquisition that we can take risk in order to move faster. So I'll throw that kind of as a foundational layer, and then see if others have specific examples or other things they want to add.
General Buehler.
Yeah, so I'm going to approach it from more of a contracting and maybe requirements perspective. The question is often, when you look at how the contract is written, where's the risk balance between the vendor or vendors and the government in getting after whatever the technical solution is, balanced by who gets to decide what 85% is? Because it's not necessarily the same. So in the construct of the portfolio acquisition executives that the Army's driving down right now. That PAE has the contracting folks and the requirements folks aligned with the capability program executives who manage we'll call them programs for right now, but really it's about getting after a capability set. And so when we're looking at making the trades, it's all of those pieces still have to align, right? So I have to make sure that the contract's aligned well enough to allow that flexibility, whether it's a capability solutions opening or a commercial solutions opening, or whether I'm doing an OTA agreement, or whether it's a FAR-based contract. There's a lot of flexibility and opportunity in all of those types of contracts, but that community has to be very much tied with who's deciding what 85% is good enough, and then how do I move on, right? So if I write my contract too restrictive, I'm putting the contracting officer ultimately in the line to decide what 85% is in some cases. If I write it too wide open, I may be leaving the vendor in the decision loop of what 85% is good enough. And we want to make sure that all three are part of that discussion going forward. So the transformation process will work if we all approach it from that perspective. Like, all of us need to get to 85%, and how we define what 85% is right now from what 85% is going to be in 12 months, 18 months, 36 months, I think we can get to that discussion on what is useful for the soldiers. And so I think it kind of also comes back to not just the organization that says they're the requirements organization, but I've put it in the hands of soldiers, or I've put it in the hands of commanders in a warfighting simulation, and they've been able to use it, test it, see how it plays amongst their capabilities. And if they think that it's 85% good to go, or even 55% good to go is better than what I have today, then we ought to be able to move out in that space and be attuned to that, and not necessarily, well, I said I wanted it to do, all these other things and make ice cream also.
Admiral Goucher, in your world of nuclear power, there's certain non-negotiables with regards to safety. I'm interested, and I think the audience would be interested in your perspective on a 85% solution. Where is that applicable in your world?
Yeah, well, I think General Smith really nailed it, which is, so we're not going to compromise safety, whether that's nuclear power, nuclear weapons, and we have nuclear weapons as well. So we're not going to compromise safety there, and we're not going to compromise sailor safety as we submerge, below the surface of the water and take risk there. But it doesn't mean we won't take any risk. And so I think a huge opportunity for us is in unmanned. And so for example, we deployed a submarine last year with unmanned underwater vehicles, and we went out and tested it. Before we deployed them, we lost one. And my team came and said, well, we can't deploy him because we're supposed to have two. And I'm like, okay, well, we only got one, so go anyway. And then it didn't work once we deployed, so we had to mail it back and fix it and send it. But we kept trying, because we said, hey, we don't care, we're testing, we're learning. And so that's a point where we're willing to take some risk, because it's unmanned. Because if I lose the thing, I don't lose a sailor. Yeah, we lose some money, but that's the only way we're going to press forward. And so you just got to, kind of grit your teeth and bear it a little bit. But to get to kind of the idea of contracting risk, right? Because Scott, you got cost, you got schedule, and you got quality, and they typically, you're always having to trade off. I think in how we write requirements is a very easy way to start getting to that 85%. Because, the dirty secret is, as an operator, I generate some requirement, and they say, well, how long do you want this thing to have to travel? And I say, I don't know, 100 miles. But the reality is, if you gave me 50 miles, I could work with that, right? And so I think I'll go and I'll find out, hey, we've been at 95 miles for the last 9 months trying to get that last 5 miles. And I think we've got to have that conversation. And on the military side, it's between, the warfare center, the acquisition program office, and then the operator. And the more that we do that and we just say, get it in the hands of the operators, I'll figure out how to make it work, and we'll iterate. is really the smart way to build capability. I think we do that in a bureaucratic way that's very siloed today, and I think some of what the Department of War is trying to get after is to break that silo down and go from operator to acquisition altogether. And if you look, I'll point to Australia in their Ghost Shark program with Anduril. Mark Hammond, the chief of the Navy, is down at the waterfront, and they're talking about what they can do, and he says that's good enough, and then they move on, and they delivered that program in about 2 years. We've tried to deliver similar programs over a decade, chasing these unobtainium requirements, and we just don't get there. So again, nuclear, absolutely no risk. Sailor safety, no risk. But unmanned, boy, there's a lot of opportunity for risk there. And I would translate that to, there's some weapon opportunities and sensor opportunities and other things like that as well.
Yes, sir. Anyone else? General Tracy, I'm going to direct a question your way. How is the Marine Corps leveraging advanced training technologies to sustain and enhance proficiency in forward-deployed expeditionary environments while ensuring seamless integration with operational C5I systems to support the readiness of units at the tactical edge?
I appreciate that. That's a great question. And having come from being the G3 at 3MEF during the Pelosi visit, that is very much top of mind, as well as also being part of the force design revolution. So we're bringing new kit into the battle space. We're bringing organizational changing kit and literally changing the organization as we're developing how to train and implement this equipment. Training and Education Command, with their Project Tripoli, creating the live virtual constructive environment and linking it through the M10 network, which also hooks into the Navy's virtual training, allows us to do very different training than what we've done in the past over much greater depths at the tactical level all the way up to the operational level. So in the environment, in 2019 when I was out there, if we wanted to utilize a live picture and a live feed of the ships and aircraft that were out there, we would have to have something over here in one room, and then we could construct, after months of effort, construct a synthetic training scenario and put that in a different room. And right now, out at 3MEF and 1MEF at Camp Pendleton, those are synthesized. And so we can stack training objectives from the lowest Marine out there in the new Marine Littoral Regiment deployed to the Philippines, all the way up through Echelon 2, 3 headquarters, and do an entire synchronized training operation. Really, to be part of seeing this mature granted it's been 6 years, but to see that mature here in the last half decade has really been a thrill and a testament to all of the great people who are working really hard getting after this in the model and sim.
Very good, thank you. General Smith, which barrier must be broken first to accelerate adoption of training technologies in your world?
Yeah, I forget who alluded to it early on, but the answer is culture. It's not so much that technology doesn't exist. It's probably the quote you referenced of your deputy having on his desk. We really just have to think differently. I don't know how many of you know General Anderson, who was the previous J7, currently AFRICOM commander, but he, as my boss in the J7, would continually iterate the need that we have to think differently. He would reference a book from World War I, I believe it was, where it talked about the reason, actually World War II, I think, the reason that the French lost initially to the Germans, from a Frenchman's point of view, was that they failed to think differently. I think that's consistent for us as we think about how we can incorporate technology into our training education. A couple just kind of minor examples, just talking to my staff recently. There's a lot of tools and ways we can collaborate. Well, I grew up on email, and that's how I collaborate, right? And it's just, it's the culture that I grew up in. The other is as we stood up the Space Force, General Raymond, our first Chief of Space Operations, talked about we would be a digital service. And so I was really excited the first time I went to the Pentagon and had a staff job in the Pentagon on the space staff. And the first day they brought me in like the 8 different 3-ring binders of information for the day. It's just to overcome ourselves and the culture that we've put in place is the biggest challenge. Really interested in ideas and feedback as to how we can overcome and change that culture. And I don't know that it can be top-down directed. Some of it is giving more leeway and leadership for our junior officers and enlisted that understand this digital environment better than we do, and realizing that we can learn from them, but open to other suggestions and ideas. But that's my thought, is culture and our inability to adapt is probably our biggest restriction.
Good. Thank you. With our remaining time, we're going to execute a lightning round. I'm going to start with General Hill, and we'll work back toward me. Each of you have 1 minute. What would you like to address the audience with regards to how they can help you all in your respective services and mission sets? 1 minute each, please.
Roger. So as a J7, I'm focused on my workforce and how I train them to deliver not just effective exercises, but efficient exercises. So any tools, so AI that I can drag off old exercise constructs, safety and the like, and apply it, it saves me time, which means I can generate more exercises for the Joint Force. That's a really powerful mechanism. It's not actually the combat aspects of it, it's my team building exercises, not just by ourselves, but with the likes of Indo-PACOM and the like. That's really important. And that's what I'm after from this is, what are the techniques, tactics, operations, or indeed tools I can use to optimize how I plan, design, plan, and execute training.
General Beeler.
I'm really interested in what we're not doing, what we don't see, right? So this is a cultural problem. If I have on the glasses I'm wearing today, I might not see that the RFP I've put out makes absolutely no sense. Or that you may have a product already on the shelf that does 85% of what that requirement is, but because it's only 85%, the culture has said, well, it's not good enough, I'm not going to bring it in to look at it. So what I would offer is take advantage of the opportunity to just bring it to our attention. Half the time, it's, you know, it gets brought to maybe a lower level person's attention, and they are like, great, but I'm on a path and I want to stay on my path because I have a schedule I need to do. I offer, just bring it up. Let me know if you've got a product or a service that gets to 75, 85% of what we need, bring it to my attention. If you're not getting anything from the staff, whether it's me or my deputy, we're interested in knowing how to break those things down because we still see the fact that I'm on a schedule, I got a path, I'm doing a plan. There are people still stuck on the treadmill, and we need to get to operational outcomes now.
Thank you. John Tracy.
2 hards, 2 softs. Hard need continued vertical integration, cislunar to subsurface, simulated, where we can war game, develop strategy against a red thinking opponent. Second is an AI wargaming sensei. I need an AI that knows how to fight a certain way, a certain game, and then I can judge players and score them. Those are the hard ones. Soft ones from industry, this would be helpful, is how does this moment fail? You know better than anybody the holes. We have a lot of great overarching and aspirational phrases, words, motivation, but how in the detail level does this fail? That's important to the second aspect, which is collaboration and communication. This is probably a once-in-a-lifetime, once-in-a-career opportunity with this alignment that we've heard about from the highest levels of our government all the way down to us. How do we let this slip through our fingers? It's not having frank conversations about the risk, trade-offs, and that's all through collaboration. So those would be my 4 asks.
Thank you. General Smith.
Yeah, we're building a service. It's new, 6 years old, but it's still new. There's a lot we need to build. We need your ideas, we need your help, we need your partnership and collaboration. So open to any of those ideas. We're not trying to recreate traditions and approaches of the past. We're trying to be unique and address the specific challenges of the space domain. So open to any of those. And then the last thing I would ask for all of, I'll start where I started this morning at the panel. I would ask all of us to remain outcome focused, specifically on doing all of this so that we can drive operational dominance. Thanks.
General Cropsey.
All right, I'll go nerd herd on you. A couple of questions I have that I don't have answers for. What does a fully synthesized hybrid training environment look like where I'm doing real exercise ops and I am then augmenting the scale of that in a synthetic environment so that I am getting the best of both worlds? Question one. Question two, what does AI on the edge look like where my AI is actually directly interacting with the environment that it's in? And what are the implications when it comes to the way that you think about putting together simulation and training? Question number three, how do I integrate from all the way from, I'll call it high fidelity physics-based models where I tend to live as an engineer, all the way through simulation training events in an operational context, so that I have one continuous ecosystem that allows me to pull data all the way from one edge to the other edge in a consistent digital environment that allows me to get the synergies of both because I want to have my cake and eat it too. So those are the three things that I would say I'm interested in answers to. If you bring me answers back to those, I would also ask you to tell me why I care about yours in particular and how it's different from the 29 other guys lined up at my door. Thanks.
Admiral Goucher.
Okay, so I'll give you a little different spin on what I started off with. So one, how do I take my 3-ring binders full of data and my hardware and get it quickly and efficiently into a digital environment so I can bring to bear digital tools and AI to help solve my problems, be they operational or maintenance. Second, how do we build the right business case such that the Navy can have the data that it needs on its systems, but bring to bear industry, in a fair way, so that we can both win in that space, so that we've got the data, you've got the tools, we can quickly solve the problem. So what is the best business case for that? And then help me get off the ground quickly to my virtual reality team training environment, recognizing I have a few digital single station models. What's my fastest way to get to a reality where I can network those and do team training?
Super. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a round of applause and thanks for our panelists. Okay, it's lunchtime. Thanks so much for your attention this morning. We're off to a great start. I declare ITSEC 2025 open.